My name is Serena Calloway. I'm 34 years old. And at exactly 7:42 in the evening on the 7th of April, in the grand ballroom of the Hargrove Estate in Savannah, Georgia, in front of 211 guests, my older sister Vanessa picked up my left hand, turned it slowly under the light of a 12-foot chandelier, and said, loudly enough for the nearest 4 tables to hear, "I'm sorry, but is that ring from a craft fair?" The room didn't go silent. Rooms that full never go silent all at once. But the conversations within 12 feet of where I sat tapered and stalled the way they do when something uncomfortable has been said and no one quite knows how to react. I felt my mother, 2 chairs to my left, shift in her seat. I saw my husband's cousin Brienne, seated at the adjacent table, look down at her water glass with the studied concentration of someone pretending not to have heard something they very clearly heard. My mother-in-law Diane, who was seated directly across the table, did not look up at all, which, in the Marchand family, is a form of very controlled emotion. I did not move my hand. I did not pull it back. I sat in my ivory silk wedding gown, the one with the hand-embroidered bodice that had taken a seamstress in Positano, Italy 11 weeks to complete, and I looked at my sister and I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a nervous smile, not the smile of someone managing embarrassment or calculating damage. The smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment for 11 months and was now watching it arrive precisely on schedule. What Vanessa did not know was that the ring she was holding up to the chandelier light, the ring she was calling unusual, sea glass colored, and craft fair cheap, had been formally appraised by one of the most respected estate gemologists in the southeastern United States at a value of $2.1 million. What she did not know was that the woman who had performed that appraisal, a 61-year-old gemologist named Margaret Ashworth, was seated at that precise moment at table 7, 22 feet away, in a navy silk blouse, eating her salmon, with a direct and unobstructed sightline to the head table that I had personally verified during 3 separate visits to the estate during the planning process. What Vanessa did not know, what no one in my family knew, was that I had spent 8 deliberate and patient months constructing the conditions for this evening, not out of cruelty, not out of performance, but because I had finally, at 34 years old, stopped waiting for someone else to tell the truth about my life. What they didn't know was that I had built it quietly, built it carefully, built it in a silence so deep and so chosen that not a single person in that room had heard a sound. This is that story. To understand what happened in that ballroom on a Saturday evening in April, you have to understand a house on Wentworth Street in Charleston, South Carolina, and what it meant to grow up as the second daughter in it. The house itself was a narrow 2-story single with green shutters and a side porch that my father refinished himself across 3 separate summers, 1 section at a time, in the methodical way he approached everything. Robert Calloway spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Charleston and was the kind of man whose love language was maintenance, keeping things working, keeping things orderly, keeping things from breaking down. Patricia Calloway, my mother, ran the women's circle at First Baptist, organized the neighborhood watch roster, brought casseroles to families who had lost someone, and knew which of her neighbors was struggling before they admitted it to themselves. They were comfortable people, my parents. Not wealthy, but stable. Not warm in an obvious way, but not unkind either. What they were, and what I did not fully understand until I was well into my 20s, was responsive. They responded to what was presented to them, and for as long as I can remember, what was presented to them most vividly and most persistently was Vanessa. My sister is 3 years older than me. She is 37 now. She was born knowing how to occupy a room, how to angle herself toward the light in a way that made everything else recede into the background. She was not the most academically gifted child in her class. She was not the most disciplined or the most studious. But she had a quality that my father called charm, and my mother called confidence, and that I, after 3 decades of observing it closely, came to understand as something more precise: performance, not dishonesty. Performance. Vanessa genuinely believed every version of herself she presented. She believed it with her whole body. with the complete conviction of someone who has never once questioned whether the room agrees. And because she believed it so fully, the room almost always agreed. She went to cosmetology school after high school and built, with genuine industry and real talent, a hair and makeup studio called Luminaire in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Charleston. The studio was well-reviewed, well-photographed on local lifestyle blogs, and staffed by 3 employees she had hired by the time she was 26. She drove a white Mercedes she called Bianca. She had a group of friends who were uniformly glamorous and slightly in orbit around her. She was, in the language of our family and our extended community, the successful one. And in the Calloway household, success had a clarifying effect. It meant that Vanessa's assessments of all things carried the weight of expertise, and all things were, in some way, related to Vanessa. I want to give you 3 specific moments, not to build a case, not to perform a grievance, but because texture matters when you are trying to understand why a woman would spend 11 months of her engagement in silence, rather than simply explaining a ring to her family. These 3 moments are the reason. The first, I was 14 years old. I had entered the South Carolina State Science Fair with a project on the water filtration capacity of bio-sand filters, which I had spent 4 months building in the garage on weekends. It was the only project from our school to qualify for state competition that year, in 11 years, according to my teacher. I placed 2nd overall. I came home with a ribbon and a certificate and a photograph of me with the judge. And at dinner that evening, my father glanced at the ribbon and said, "That's great, Bug," and then looked across the table and asked Vanessa whether she had heard back about the part she had auditioned for in the school musical. He did not ask what my project had been about. That evening, I lay in my room and told myself it didn't matter, that I was being oversensitive, that 2nd place at state was the kind of thing that spoke for itself. I told myself that for years. It was the first of many things I told myself for years. The second, I was 22, newly graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design with a degree in graphic design, and I had just accepted a junior designer position at a brand consultancy in Atlanta. My first real professional role, the first tangible evidence that the years of work had translated into something the world would pay for. The Sunday after I accepted the offer, the family gathered for dinner as they always did, and I arrived with the news ready. Before I could deliver it, Vanessa announced that she had just hired her 3rd employee at Luminaire. The announcement landed on the room like a stone on water. My father leaned forward, my aunts asked questions, my mother was visibly proud. The conversation ran its course over 15 minutes. Then my mother turned to me and said, "Serena, what's new with you?" By then the window had passed. I told her about the Atlanta position in 2 sentences. She said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," and refilled her water glass. I drove back to my apartment on I-26 in the dark and said nothing to anyone. The 3rd is the one I have never told in full before now, and I am telling it because it is the specific moment that changed my approach, not to Vanessa, but to myself. Elliot Marchand proposed to me on a Saturday evening in October, on the rooftop of Circa 1880 in downtown Charleston at 7:15 in the evening. He had arranged for the restaurant to close the rooftop for an hour, which they do not normally do, and there were candles in hurricane jars along the railing and below us. The battery spread out in the October light like a photograph of itself. He got down on one knee and he did not have a rehearsed speech. He simply said, "You are the clearest thing in my life, and I would like you to be a permanent part of it." I said yes without hesitating. We sat up there for an hour and 40 minutes, drinking champagne and watching the lights come on over the harbor. And I remember thinking that I had never felt so specifically and precisely known by another human being. I called my parents that evening. My mother cried. My father said, "Elliot is a good man." Both true. The following morning, my parents organized a family brunch at the Wentworth Street house. Just immediate family. Just the inner circle, the right size for this kind of news. I arrived at 9:15 in the morning in a state of happiness I can only describe as physical. It was in my hands, in the way I was walking, in the way I kept looking at the ring on my finger with the particular wonder of someone holding something ancient and rare and entirely new to them at the same time. Vanessa arrived at 9:45 in the morning. She walked in, carrying a tray of pastries from a bakery in downtown Charleston, set it on the counter, hugged my mother, and then turned to the room and said, in a voice that was bright and trembling and utterly real, "I need to tell you all something. I'm pregnant." The brunch became, in 4 seconds, an entirely different event. My mother's hands went to her face. My father crossed the room. My aunts, who had arrived minutes earlier, began talking over each other. The energy of the room reorganized itself instantly and completely around this news. My engagement, which had been the entire reason for the gathering, slid quietly to one side like a coat being moved off a chair to make room for something else. I sat in my chair and looked at the ring. I did not cry. I did not make a scene. I smiled at Vanessa when she looked at me, and I said, "That's wonderful news, because I meant it, because I do love my sister, in the complicated and weight-bearing way you love family, not cleanly, not simply, but truly and with full knowledge of what it costs." 6 weeks later, Vanessa miscarried. My family gathered around her grief the way families should, and I was there, present and real, holding her hand on a Tuesday night in November, when she needed someone to sit with the loss. I meant that too, but I also sat alone in my apartment that same Tuesday night after I drove home and understood something I had been avoiding for 3 decades. The expectation that if I succeeded clearly enough, loudly enough, undeniably enough, Vanessa would eventually see me, was never going to resolve itself, not because she was cruel, but because the pattern was too old and too comfortable and too invisible to everyone involved, including to her. She did not know what she was doing. That was the most important part. She genuinely did not know, and no amount of me succeeding harder was going to make her see something she had never been asked to look at. So, I made a decision. Not angry. Not bitter. Deliberate. I decided to stop trying to be heard through her and to start building something she simply couldn't touch. I decided that whatever came next in my life, I would keep it close and keep it quiet until it was ready to speak for itself. And the first thing that needed to speak for itself was the ring. Elliot Marchand is the 4th generation of his family to build things in South Carolina. The Marchands are not flashy people. They are old money quiet, which is a specific and particular thing, the kind of family that owns paintings they keep in storage, drives cars that are 12 years old and perfectly maintained, and says what they mean without decoration. His grandmother Eleanor had been the matriarch of the Marchand family for 63 years when I met her. She was 87. She had the sharpest eyes I have ever seen on a person of any age, the kind that see through the surface of things to the intention underneath and do not comment on what they find there unless they consider it necessary. Elliot told me the ring's history 3 weeks after the engagement when I asked him directly. He told me that Eleanor had given it to him when he was 11 years old, the summer before his grandfather Gerald passed. She had taken it off her own finger. She had worn it for 41 years and pressed it into his small hand and said, "This goes to whoever you choose most carefully." He had kept it in a mahogany box in his study for 27 years, waiting, as he put it, to be certain. He was certain about me. He did not say that with drama. He said it the way Marchands say everything important simply, once and without requiring confirmation. The ring itself, a cushion-cut alexandrite, 3.8 carats, naturally occurring, set in platinum with an Edwardian filigree design of such delicacy that the metalwork looked lace-like under magnification. The stone shifted in color depending on the light source, a deep, smoky green-gray in daylight that the casual observer might genuinely mistake for sea glass or a clouded tourmaline. Under incandescent light, it shifted to a deep wine burgundy red that made it look like it was lit from within. I had never seen anything like it, and did not, at the moment it was placed on my finger, fully understand what I was holding. I spent 3 evenings researching alexandrites after the engagement. Gemological databases, auction records, academic journals from institutions I had never heard of. What I found was this: Naturally occurring alexandrites above 2 carats are globally rare to a degree that most people's conception of the word rare does not adequately cover. Above 3 carats, with no treatment and no synthetic components, the occurrence becomes what gem specialists call almost theoretical, meaning that the known specimens can be counted and named. The combination of the stone size, its verified natural origin, its color shift quality, and its documented provenance from the Edinburgh estate auction of 1931 made the ring not simply valuable but historically significant. I closed my laptop on the third evening and sat with that for a long time. Then I called Catherine Ledge. Catherine is the Marchand family attorney, a precise, unhurried woman in her late 50s who communicates with the economy of someone who bills by the minute and has done so for 30 years. I asked her about the estate documentation process, and she confirmed what I suspected. The ring needed a formal appraisal for the purposes of insurance and the Marchand estate records. She gave me a name, Margaret Ashworth, Whitaker Street, Savannah. 37 years in estate jewelry. The best, Catherine said, without elaboration, in the southeast. On the Thursday morning of the 9th of May, I drove from Charleston to Savannah. I arrived at Margaret Ashworth's studio at 10 o'clock in the morning. The studio was on the second floor of a narrow brick building on Whitaker Street, quiet, precise, the kind of room where important things are examined carefully. Margaret herself was 61, tall, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and the calm, unhurried attention of someone who has learned to see by slowing down. She greeted me, looked at the ring before she looked at me, and said, without preamble, "May I?" I gave her my hand. She spent the next 2 hours and 44 minutes examining that ring in a way I have never watched anyone examine anything. She used 4 light sources, 3 magnification instruments at different levels of power, a spectrometer to verify chemical composition. She consulted 2 reference texts that she retrieved from a shelf behind her without looking, which told me she knew exactly where they were and had consulted them many times before. She worked without commentary for the first 90 minutes. I sat across from her and drank the tea she offered and watched her face. Her face changed twice. The first time was when she confirmed the natural origin, no treatment, no synthetic components, the stone as it had been formed. The second time was slower, more internal. She set down the spectrometer and looked at something I could not see for 30 seconds. Then she set down the lupin, placed her hands flat on the velvet table, and looked at me over her glasses with the composed directness of a woman who has delivered significant information before, knows exactly how to do it. "Mrs. Calloway to be," she said, "I want to make sure you understand what you're wearing." She told me the valuation, $2.1 million. Conservative estimate, she said. The alexandrite market had been climbing for 11 years, driven by the near-complete depletion of the Ural deposits in Russia, which had historically been the primary source of quality natural specimens. The documented provenance, the Edinburgh auction catalogue from 1931, preserved in a leather folio in the Marchand family's possession, was both verified and significant, establishing a 93-year ownership chain that was itself rare in the estate jewelry world. The Edwardian setting was original. The stone had never been removed from its setting, which she could confirm by the undisturbed condition of the prongs and gallery. She had, she told me, personally examined only 2 alexandrites of comparable quality in 37 years of practice. She finished and looked at me and waited. I said, "And if someone saw this ring without knowing any of that, what would they see?" She said, "They would see a large gray-green stone in an old-fashioned setting. They would think it was interesting or unusual or perhaps not to their taste. They might assume it was costume jewelry or something chosen for sentimental rather than aesthetic reasons." A pause. They would be profoundly and completely wrong. I left the studio at 12:44 in the afternoon and drove back to Charleston on Highway 17 with the particular quietness of someone who has been given information that reorganizes things. I sat in my kitchen on Drayton Street with a cup of chamomile tea I made but did not drink for 41 minutes. I thought about the brunch. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the Atlanta announcement and the science fair ribbon. I thought about what Vanessa had said at the rehearsal dinner preview visit 2 weeks earlier, when she had looked at the ring in natural light and said, "Did you choose this yourself or was it a family piece?" Because it's very... She had searched for a word. Different. She had meant it kindly. She had been offering me an explanation that would protect me from embarrassment. That was what made it so perfectly, precisely clarifying. I called Margaret Ashworth at 4:17 in the afternoon. I thanked her for the appraisal. I told her Catherine Ledge would coordinate the insurance paperwork. Then I said, "I have an unusual request. I am getting married on the 7th of April at the Hargrove Estate in Savannah. I would very much like you to attend as my guest." A pause. "I have a feeling something may happen at the reception that would be most effectively addressed by your presence." Another pause. Then Margaret said, in the dry and measured tone of someone who has seen a great many things and is not surprised by any of them, "I have the same feeling. I would be honored." I thanked her. I placed her at table 7 when I completed the seating chart in March. Table 7 had a direct and unobstructed sightline to the head table. I had confirmed it with a tape measure and a sightline test using a standing lamp on 3 separate visits during the venue planning process. I put the white ranunculus centerpiece on that table because it was the largest of the floral arrangements, and I knew Vanessa would remember it afterward. I told no one. Not my mother, who asks questions in the gentle, persistent way of someone who considers herself entitled to know. Not my closest friend and colleague Priya, who had watched me drive to Savannah that Thursday and return 3 hours later looking different. She asked. I said the insurance was sorted. She accepted that. Not Elliot's parents, not my aunts, not the one cousin I actually talked to, a woman named Louise who lives in Colombia and who would have kept the secret perfectly, but whom I did not want to burden with the weight of it. I kept it in the way I had learned, over 34 years, to keep the things that mattered most. Close, quiet, and entirely my own. I told Elliot the number that same evening, the 9th of May, when I returned from Savannah. He was reading at the kitchen table when I came in. I sat across from him and told him. He set the book down. He was quiet for a moment in the particular Marchand way, not distant but processing. Then he said, "Grandmother knew exactly what she was giving me." I said, "She absolutely did." He said, "You want to let it stay quiet?" It was not a question. I said, "I want to let it be itself, without anyone's prior knowledge shaping how it lands." He said, "That is the most you thing you've ever said." He poured us each a glass of Burgundy, and we talked about something else for the rest of the evening, because some decisions don't need debating. They just need to be made and then lived. In the 8 months between the 9th of May and the 7th of April, Vanessa remained entirely and consistently herself. At my bridal shower in late January, hosted by my mother at the Wentworth Street house, she gave a toast that was beautifully told, genuinely funny in places, and positioned herself, with the skill of someone who does it so naturally, they don't notice they're doing it, at the center of every significant moment in my story. At the final dress fitting in March, she arrived 22 minutes late, cited traffic on Highway 17, and spent a meaningful portion of the appointment offering unsolicited opinions about the venue's floral choices that she delivered with the authority of someone who had attended 17 events and formed opinions about all of them. At the rehearsal dinner on the evening of the 6th of April, she appeared at my side in the garden of the restaurant at 9:22 in the evening, looked at my hand in the outdoor lighting, and said, "I've been meaning to ask you, the ring. Did you pick that yourself? Because it is very..." She stopped. "Different." I said, "It's a family piece." She said, "Ah, that explains it." She nodded as though something had been settled. She went back inside. I stood in the garden for a moment longer, alone, and thought about 24 hours, and felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as readiness. If you are still watching and you have ever been the person in your family whose accomplishments were treated as interruptions to someone else's narrative, drop a comment below right now and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country, your time of night. Because what is coming next in this story is for you specifically, and I need you here for it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. We release a new story every single week on Revenge Chronicles, and every one of them is built on the same quiet engine. Stay with me. The wedding day, I want to give it to you in full because it deserves it. The ceremony was at 4:30 in the afternoon in the garden of the Hargrove Estate, a pre-Civil War property on the edge of Savannah that Elliott's architectural firm had spent 22 months restoring. The garden was edged in mature boxwood hedges and centered on a limestone fountain that had been dry for 40 years and that Elliott had personally supervised the restoration of, which told you everything you needed to know about him. The flowers were pale green hellebores and white ranunculus. The ceremony lasted 38 minutes. The officiant was a woman named Reverend Colette Gardner, who had known Elliott's family for 2 generations, and who spoke about marriage with the quiet authority of someone who had watched a great many of them, both the ones that held and the ones that didn't. My dress was the ivory silk with the hand-embroidered bodice from Positano. My something old was the ring, though no one present knew its full weight yet. My something new was a pair of pearl earrings Diane Marchand had sent to my hotel room that morning, with a note that said, simply, "Welcome." Eleanor arrived in a wheelchair pushed by Elliott's cousin Marcus. She was wearing a cream silk jacket and a brooch I recognized from a Marchand family photograph taken at a summer gathering in 1962. She was 87 years old, and she did not miss a single moment of that ceremony. When I walked past her chair on my father's arm, she caught my eye. She did not smile. She nodded. Once, with the complete and measured recognition of a woman who knew exactly what she had given and was satisfied by what it had been given to. My father walked me down the aisle in a gray morning suit he had pressed himself. He cried when he saw me in the dress. In 34 years, it was the only time I had ever seen him do it. I cried too, briefly, at the altar, and then I collected myself, because collecting myself is what I have always done, and I said the words that mattered, and I meant them with everything I had. By 6 o'clock, the ballroom was open, and the reception was full and alive, with the particular warmth of 211 people gathered around something real. The string quartet was in the east corner. The flowers were on every table in the low arrangements I had requested so that people could see each other across them. The smell of gardenias, which Priya had sourced from a grower in Beaufort after I spent 3 months looking for the right one, was in every corner of the room. I was at the head table with Elliott beside me, his parents to his right, mine to my left, and the room spread out before us in the golden light of a Savannah evening, and I was happy. Not the performance of happiness. The actual, undecorated thing. By 7:15 in the evening, the first course plates had been cleared and the toasts had been delivered. Elliott's best man, Paul, who is a dry and laconic structural engineer from Columbia, gave a toast that was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long and contained one genuinely funny joke about load-bearing walls that made the architects in the room laugh harder than anyone else. Vanessa's toast as maid of honor was 5 minutes and 43 seconds. I could see the clock on the far wall, and it was well constructed and warmly received. She cried at the right moment. The room laughed in the right places. My mother dabbed her eyes. I applauded with everyone else and meant it, because she had told a story beautifully, and that is a real skill and I respect it. It was at 7:42 in the evening that Vanessa appeared at my left elbow. She had been circulating since the toast, talking to Elliott's extended family with the focused energy of someone who is very good at being at parties. She had had 2 full glasses of champagne in the preceding hour, and a third that she had been carrying for 20 minutes and was now 3/4 empty. She sat in the chair beside me and leaned in, and she reached over and took my left hand with the ease of someone who has always felt entitled to what is adjacent to them. She lifted it slowly into the chandelier light. The ring turned from its green-gray daylight color to something slightly more complex, slightly more luminous, under the direct beam of the chandelier above us. To the untrained eye, a large pale stone in an antique platinum setting, unusual, unreadable, cheap-looking to someone who didn't know. She said, Serena, I'm going to say something and I need you not to be offended. I said, all right. She said, is that ring from a craft fair? 4 tables went quiet, not all at once, but in a cascade, like dominoes falling sideways. The table to our left, then the one behind it, then the one diagonally across. I could feel the attention of the room changing shape around us. Vanessa continued. She was not performing cruelty. I want to be precise about this, because it matters for the ending. She was performing authority. She was the older sister, the one who knew things, the one who could name what the younger one had missed. It's just, the color is like sea glass, and the setting is so old-fashioned, and look, for a wedding like this. She gestured, lightly, at the estate, the flowers, the room full of 211 people. I assumed Elliot would have gone with something more, I don't know. Classic. Something that really makes a statement. Did you choose this yourself? Because, sweetheart, I'm not trying to be unkind, but there is a jeweler in downtown Charleston who does the most beautiful diamond solitaires. And I could absolutely make an introduction if you ever wanted to look at. It's a family piece, I said. Great, you said that before, I know. She patted my hand. I just think you deserve something that really shows, you know. Something that reads, at a wedding like this, the ring is what people remember. She looked around the room meaningfully, as though the room agreed with her. I looked at table 7. Margaret Ashworth had been still for approximately 30 seconds. She had her fork in her right hand, and she was not moving it. She was looking directly at me with the particular attentiveness of someone who has heard every word and has been waiting for a signal. I gave her the smallest nod I had, the kind that is barely a movement, barely a gesture, that registers only if you are already watching for it. Margaret set her fork down. She placed her napkin beside her plate in a single, deliberate motion. She stood. She was a tall woman, and the act of standing drew immediate attention from the surrounding tables. She smoothed her navy silk blouse, and then she walked from table 7 to the head table with the unhurried precision of someone who has been doing important things for 37 years and has never once felt the need to rush them. She came to a stop behind me and slightly to my right, positioned so that she was visible to the head table, to the table directly in front, to the 2 tables flanking us, and to anyone else in the room who had begun to understand that something was happening. She addressed the table, not Vanessa specifically, not me specifically, the whole table, with a warm and completely controlled smile. I am so sorry to interrupt, she said. My name is Margaret Ashworth. I'm a gemologist and estate jewelry specialist based here in Savannah, and I am genuinely honored to be at this beautiful wedding today. She looked at me and at Elliot with real warmth. Then her gaze moved, naturally and without emphasis, to my hand, still held in the chandelier light where Vanessa had positioned it, the ring visible and clear. I couldn't help but overhear a question about this ring, and I want to make sure there is no confusion about what it is. Vanessa laughed, a small, uncertain sound, the laugh of someone who suddenly finds herself in a room she doesn't recognize. Oh, there's no confusion, she said. I was just noting that it's a bit unusual. It is unusual, Margaret said pleasantly, and with total precision. That's exactly right. What you are looking at is a naturally occurring alexandrite, 3.8 carats. Color-shifting stone. The green-gray you are seeing right now is its response to this daylight-balanced chandelier lighting. Under warm, incandescent light, it shifts to a deep wine red, almost burgundy. That color change is the defining characteristic of the species. She paused. Natural alexandrites of this size and quality, no heat treatment, no irradiation, no synthetic components, have a global occurrence rate that gemologists estimate at less than 1 per 40 million for stones above 2 carats. Above 3 carats, the number becomes what we call almost notional. We are talking about a category of stone where the known specimens worldwide can, in some studies, be individually named. Another pause. She let that land. The specific stone on this ring has documented provenance from an estate auction in Edinburgh in 1931. I hold the original auction catalog documentation in my files. She said it simply, the way you state a fact that has been in your files for 11 months because you have been waiting. I personally appraised this ring 11 months ago. The preparation those words implied, the timeline, the arrangement, the patience, went through the room like a current. At a conservative valuation of $2.1 million, the nearest 20 people did not breathe. I watched it happen. I watched the breath leave the room in a slow, collective release that was not a sound but was somehow audible anyway. Vanessa's hand, which had been holding mine since she sat down, went entirely slack. It separated from mine and came to rest on the tablecloth between us, fingers slightly open, as though she had set something down. Margaret continued, with the composed and genuine warmth of a professor who loves her subject and is glad to share it. The setting is original Edwardian platinum, hand-engraved mill-grain filigree detailing consistent with workshop production from approximately 1908 to 1912. The combination of the stone's verified rarity, the 93-year documented provenance, and the untouched original setting. The stone has never been removed from this mount, which I was able to confirm during examination, is what drives the valuation to the number I gave. It is, in 37 years of practice, among the 2 or 3 most remarkable pieces of estate jewelry I have personally examined. She looked at Vanessa once more. Directly, briefly, and with complete composure, not unkindly, not with any particular emphasis, with simple, clean accuracy. So you were absolutely right. It is quite unusual. She smiled at me. She touched my shoulder for one moment with the particular warmth of a woman who understands exactly what she has just done for someone. She said, "Congratulations, Serena. What a beautiful, beautiful evening." And she walked back to table 7, sat down, unfolded her napkin, picked up her fork, and resumed eating her salmon. The 4 minutes and 11 seconds that had elapsed since she stood up were the 4 most clarifying minutes of my life. Vanessa sat beside me for 14 seconds. I counted them. Then she said quietly, "Excuse me for a moment," and she was gone. I did not watch her go. I looked at my husband, who had his hand over mine on the tablecloth, over the ring, over the Alexandrite, over $2.1 million, and a 93-year provenance, and an 87-year-old woman in a cream silk jacket across the room who had given all of it its beginning. Elliot was not smiling. He was still in the way of the Marchands, and still, in their language, means everything is exactly as it should be. My father, 2 seats to my left, had heard every word. He sat very still for one long moment, the way he sat when he was doing calculations, which, as an engineer, he did constantly. Then he said in a voice barely above a murmur, directed at no one and at me simultaneously, "Serena." My God, I had no idea. I said, "I know, Dad." 3 words. I know. I said them without reproach, without weight, without the accumulated 34 years of Sunday dinners and ribbons and engagement brunches. I said them simply, as a fact, and I let them be enough. He nodded. His jaw moved slightly. He looked at the ring. He looked at me. He looked at the ring again. Then he said, "She's beautiful." He meant Eleanor, who was raising her champagne glass 1 inch in my direction from across the room with the composed satisfaction of a woman who has waited 87 years to be completely right about something. The remaining 4 hours of the reception were the best 4 hours of my life, in ways I am still finding language for. People circulated to the head table to see the ring in person, which is not normally something that happens at weddings but which felt. That evening, completely natural, Margaret became one of the most sought-after guests at the party. A working gemologist at a dinner party is extraordinary company, and she spent the evening talking about Alexandrites and Edwardian metalwork and the Edinburgh auction world with the warmth and precision of someone who has devoted her professional life to a subject she actually loves. Elliot's father, Gerard, who is a quiet man of very few words, came to my side at 9:15 in the evening and said, "Eleanor chose well." He meant the ring. He also meant me. He also possibly meant the whole evening. I thanked him and he nodded and moved away, which is the marchand equivalent of a standing ovation. Vanessa returned to the reception at 8:26 in the evening. She had been gone for 44 minutes. She was composed. Her color was restored. She positioned herself for the remainder of the evening near the bar at the far end of the ballroom, and she behaved, I will say this for her, with real grace. She clapped at the cake cutting. She danced during the last two songs. She spoke to people warmly. She did not come near the head table again. The first apology came at 11:17 in the evening in the coat-check room of the Hargrove estate, where Vanessa found me alone while I was retrieving my wrap. She had clearly waited for the moment. She had waited for the exact moment when I was alone. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." She said, "I made a fool of myself." I said, "You asked an honest question." She said, "I do it all the time." She stopped. Then, "I'm sorry, Rena." I looked at my sister in the coat-check room light in her sage gown, and I said, "I know you are." Then Elliot appeared in the doorway, and I took his arm and we walked out into the Savannah night. The second apology came at 8:53 in the morning on the 11th of April by text message, while I was on my honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast. 3 paragraphs. Phrases like, "I've been doing a lot of thinking," and "I know this goes beyond the ring," and "Please call me when you're ready." I read it twice. The light on the water outside our terrace was extraordinary that morning, that particular Mediterranean gold that makes everything else seem negotiable. I set my phone down and did not call. The third apology came 6 weeks after the wedding on a Sunday afternoon in late May in my mother's kitchen on Wentworth Street. At the table where I had eaten 1,000 childhood meals and done my homework for 9 years and learned at 14. That second place at the state science fair was something my father did not ask about. Vanessa sat across from me at that table and said, with the gravity of someone who has been carrying something for 6 weeks and has finally made the decision to put it down, "I need you to know that I have been thinking about more than the ring. I've been thinking about all of it, for years. The way I talk over you, the engagement brunch." She said those 2 words, engagement brunch, with a specific weighted acknowledgment that told me she had revisited it. I knew what I was doing in the moment. I didn't let myself know it, but I've been honest with myself since April, and I knew. And I am sorry. For all of it, not just the ring. All of it. She was crying. Quietly, privately, with the kind of tears that don't perform themselves. The kind that come from something real, being examined without flattery, possibly for the first time. I sat with it. I thought about what I wanted to say and how to say it truly. Then I said, "Vanessa, I forgive you. I mean that completely. And I also need you to understand that forgiveness isn't the same as returning to what we were. I'm not going to be small anymore. I'm not going to arrange my accomplishments so they don't outshine yours. Not because I want to wound you, but because I have spent 34 years doing that, and I'm done. I love you, and I want a real relationship with you. But a real relationship has to have equal ground. I'm offering you that if you want it." I was not emotional when I said it. I was not performing composure. I was simply being accurate, which is always the most powerful thing available to you. She nodded. She said, "I want that." I said, "Then that's where we start. Here is what I've been sitting with since that April evening in Savannah. In the months since the white ranunculus and the chandeliers and the 12 feet of silence that fell over a room when a woman said $2.1 million in the most conversational possible tone. For most of my adult life, I believed that the answer to being diminished was achievement. That if I built enough, succeeded clearly enough, became undeniable enough, the diminishment would eventually run out of room. What I have learned, at some cost, over some years, is that achievement is not the answer to diminishment. Dignity is. And dignity is not something you demonstrate by winning. It is something you carry, quietly, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. I did not seat Margaret Ashworth at table 7 to win. I seated her there because I had finally understood that my life was going to stop waiting for Vanessa's permission to be significant. The ring was significant before Vanessa picked up my hand. My career was significant before the client called. My marriage was significant before the guests arrived. None of these things required her acknowledgement to be real. They were real in themselves, in the actual texture of the days they were made of, in the choices that built them. What I created on the 7th of April was not a victory. It was a condition, the specific, prepared condition in which the truth could walk across a room and speak for itself, undiluted in front of everyone. That is what I want to offer you. Not the public reveal, though I understand that part resonates. The 41 minutes in the kitchen with the tea I didn't drink. The phone call at 4:17 in the afternoon. The seating chart with table 7 positioned at 22 measured feet. The 8 months of absolute silence, chosen not from weakness, but from the complete understanding that some truths are too important to rush. If you are the overlooked one, the second daughter, the quiet colleague, the woman whose competence is mistaken for limitation, whose accomplishments are absorbed by the room without comment, while someone else's are celebrated, I want to say this directly to you. The people who diminish you are not seeing you clearly. They are projecting their own fear of insignificance onto the person closest to them. And the answer to their fear is not to shrink from it. The answer is to build, quietly, carefully, and without announcement, until what you have built is too large and too real and too documented to be talked past. You don't have to say a word. You just have to stay with it. You just have to keep building. Because the truth, stated clearly and without drama, is the most powerful thing in any room. And the loudest comebacks are always built in silence. Tell me in the comments, has there been a moment in your life when someone you loved underestimated you so thoroughly that it changed the way you understood yourself? And what did you build in the silence they gave you? I read every single comment, everyone. I want to know what you built. To every single person who watched this story all the way to this moment, I want to say something, I mean completely. You stayed. You listened through 34 years of Sundays, through one Edinburgh ring, through ballroom in Savannah on a warm April night, and you made it here. And I believe you stayed because something in this story lives in your own house, in your own family, in your own history. You know what it is to be the one who is almost seen. Revenge Chronicles exists because of that knowledge, because the women who built things in silence deserve to have those things spoken at full volume. If this story moved you, if it rang true to something you're living right now, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment below, and share this video with the woman in your life who needs to hear it today. We release a new story every single week, and we will never run out of material, because the women who are building in silence are building every single day. We will see you next week. We will be here.